Hello, hello. Can you hear my voice? Yeah? How are you all doing? Wonderful. You are in the right place today. My name is Brandon Wint. I am a poet and also a events coordinator at Massy Arts Society, which is one of the organizations that brought this event together. I'm also a kind of a beautiful but vain spoken word artist, so sometimes I don't know what to say until people have given a round of applause. So can we just make some noise just to, there we go. Okay, all right. I feel a little bit better. Welcome to Folklore, Feminism, and Sea-Maidens, a mythical evening and conversation between Nalo Hopkinson and Valerie D. Walker. This event has been funded by the Government of Canada in conjunction with Massy Arts Society, Some Gallery, SFU Public Square, and Massy Books. Can I have a round of applause for all those lovely organizations as well? I am so excited. I'm happy to be on stage talking, but I also want to shut up so we can get to the meat and potatoes, or the mango, whatever, all the good stuff. In terms of the space that we hope to create today, of course, we're trying to create a space of mutual respect, curiosity, ideally love, and so that means, holding space for us to, be in mutual respect, irrespective of race, ethnicity, national origin, sexual orientation, gender identity, age, and disability. We want to make room for everybody. That also means respecting people's pronouns and not assuming their pronouns on the basis of what they might look like. Please refer to people using the names and pronouns that they provide. We are kind of operating under the premise of take space, but also make space. So that means during the Q&A and in the ways that we listen today, we're here to share perspectives, but also make space for other voices to be heard as well. So recognizing that we're all here to learn, and then in that same vein, practice the self-care that you need to practice. So, we're all here to listen to wonderful artists, do wonderful artsy things, and have wonderful, stirring, and provocative conversations. If you are moved in such a way that you feel like you need to take care of yourself, take a break, step out of the room, get a glass of water, all of that is okay. Respect yourself, respect your body, respect your needs. In the vein as well of mutual respect, it is my honor and it's a necessity for me to say that this city, this building, this event takes place on the unceded shared territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. I have the pleasure of working for Massy Arts Society, which is a Indigenous-led, Indigenous-owned art space, art gallery, literary event space. And so as an Indigenous-led space, it behooves us at Massy Arts, but also all of us as people who occupy this land, to bear in mind that we are, subject to and part of an ongoing colonial process that we have to undo in our ways of thinking, in our ways of doing, in our ways of acting, in our ways of animating. And so, in an event like this, I invite us to think about the ways that the stories that we tell can participate in interrupting the ongoing colonial story that's being told about this land, this place, and how we're meant to interact with it. And so, please make space for hearing the stories of the land, hearing the stories of those who have knowledge of this land for time immemorial, for centuries. And so, with all of that said, I will introduce our two featured artists for the evening. Firstly, Valerie D. Walker. This is a lovely bio. Valerie, you should commend yourself. This is a lovely bio. Valerie D. Walker is a Renaissance artist, alchemist, transmedia maker, educator, curator, indigo griot, radio wave creatrix, and BIPOC, femme futuristic transmitter. All facts. She holds a 5th level Ikenbana, Japanese flower arranging, and Chado tea ceremony degrees with Urasenke Kyoto, and lifetimes of indigo knowledge. She landed on Gaia in Honolulu and has traveled the planet in space and time. Valerie holds degrees in EECS from UC Berkeley and her MFA from NSCAD University. Valerie's artwork explores enviro, positive, natural dyeing and printing, which I think you can bear witness to in her attire today, fiber-based responsive installations, tactile virtual space, solar paneled circuits, storytelling, epigenetic memory, environmentally healing studio processes, craft-based techniques, digitalia and imagining, programming, sensuality, and Afrofuturism. Round of applause for Valerie, who you'll see later. And I do believe we'll begin our event today by hearing a reading from Nalo Hopkinson. Nalo Hopkinson is a Jamaican-born author living in Canada. Her novels and short fiction have received the World Fantasy Award, the Sturgeon Award, the Sunburst Award for Canadian Literature of the Fantastic, and the Nebula Award, among others. In 2021, Science Fiction Writers of America gave her the Damon Knight Memorial Grand Master Award for her contributions to the genre and to the community. She is the first woman of African descent and the youngest person to date to receive this award. Hopkinson is currently a professor in the School of Creative Writing at the University of British Columbia. So let us give a warm, warm, warm welcome to Nalo Hopkinson.
Thank you all very much. It's wonderful to see your faces. Thank you for that introduction. In true Caribbean fashion, I arrived just about in time. If it was true Caribbean fashion, I'd probably be late, but bless the taxi driver who pretty much flew here. So I'm going to read to you an excerpt from my novel, which I'm blanking on the name of because you're all looking at me. But it is very much in fitting with the theme tonight. It's a very short excerpt. It's got a few spoilers in it, so it's probably good that I can't remember the title. And content alert, it is set on a slave ship in those times. It has some of the realities that happened in those holds where people were sort of locked neck and knee to each other. And people died of nausea. People died of dysentery. It doesn't end that way. The New Moon's Arms, that's it. My main character, we only hear from her. Her name is the dada-haired lady, and dada-haired in Nigeria, I believe, speaks to children who are born with hair that instead of being sort of kinky like mine is, comes out in big fat curls, and they're seen as either sacred or sometimes witches. It depends on where you are. Dada-haired lady in this one is an adult and does have some powers to her, but they're a bit muted. After a lifetime of misery she could have never imagined before this, the sailors came down one day and took them out of the hold, those who could stand. So long the dada-haired lady's eyes had been yearning for the sight of the sky, but now the light pierced them like knives. Fresh, cool air to breathe made the dada-haired lady feel almost drunk. The men had been brought out of their section of the hold too. So thin they were and weak-looking. The dada-haired lady looked at her own arm. Yes, the flesh had wasted. The sailors sluiced them down with buckets of salted water. The water made her shiver. The salt stung the chafed skin on her wrists and ankles where the shackles rubbed. There was a child near her, maybe 8 years old. She hadn't seen him before. It had been too dark in the hold. He dragged 2 empty shackles where his fellows should have been. He shook and blubbered with his fear and wailed softly in his language. The dada-haired lady didn't know what he said, but Mama would be a likely bet. She knelt. Her 2 shacklemates had to kneel with her. She took the boy in her arms. He came, wriggling his way in among the chains binding her wrists, hungry for loving touch, his tiny body like chicken bones wrapped in skin. He had weeping yaws on his legs. The sailors doused everyone with oil, signaled for them to rub themselves down. The dada-hair lady rubbed oil into her skin and into the little boys. It made them gleam as though they were healthy. The scrawny boy fell asleep in her arms. There were tree branches floating in the water, birds perched on the sails. There was a shadow on the horizon. Was that land? She had to do something soon. All she could think was poison, for them all to take poison to shunt them into the world beneath the waters. If she were at home and free, she could easily have found the ingredients to make a strong dose, but she had nothing here, only the chancy power of the blood in her, and starving on the ship she hadn't been bleeding. But some few days ago their rations had been increased. Now she was only constantly a little hungry, not half fainting her days through from starvation. A flurry in the water beside the ship caught the dada-hair lady's eye. She moved a little closer to the edge. At first she could see nothing. Then her soul leapt in her breast. A head, gray-brown with curious black eyes, staring after the ship. Had one of their band jumped then? Then the person dove down into the water. The dada-hair lady had only a brief glimpse of its body, slipping bent as a sickle forward into the sea. It was cylindrical, curved, and fat with good food. Sea cow, seal. At home, people talked about sea cows who lived in the coastal waters, how you shouldn't look directly at them, lest they drag you down to the depths with them for your presumption. The dada-hair lady had never seen one up close, but the fishermen described them. They stole fish from their nets. Mommy water, thought the dada-hair lady respectfully to the thing she'd seen. Beg you please take a message to Uhamiri for me. Tell her we need help here. Tell her I am hers. I pledge to always faithfully be hers, but please would she help us now before we land and the white people eat us. The dada-hair lady peered at the water, but she couldn't see any sign of the sea cow. Her heart ached for what she'd promised. The women who were called to serve Uhamiri remained barren, but she'd made her plea and her pledge. The dada-hair lady held the boy's small, shivering body and whispered in the shell of his ear, soon, something will happen. It must. The ship began to creak more and to shudder. The dada-hair lady could hear the thundering of the surf, but no sign from Uhamiri. The ship slowed down, then tacked. The turning motion brought the dada-hair lady's nausea back. The ship lurched, throwing them all to the deck. There was a thump and a massive cracking sound. The child was thrown from the dada-hair lady's arms when she fell, dragging the two chained to her along with her. Boards snapped. As she lay tumbled on the deck, the dada-hair lady felt wetness between her thighs and a cramping of her womb. Her monthly blood had returned. She grinned fiercely. She heard me, she said to her shipmates, who were too terrified to pay mind. Holding on to whatever she could, the dada-hair lady dragged herself upright. She looked around wildly for the little boy. There, he had seen her. He was pushing his small way through adult bodies to get to her. And the determined little child made it, squeezed between the last two people separating him from her, and ran to her. She swept him up, laughing even through her own terror. She readied herself. It was time. The lost ones would go home. The ship was tilted perilously to one side. The noises of cracking timbers, sliding cannon, and screaming people were astonishing. The dada-hair lady bade her gift come down. And for the first time in months, it did. She couldn't say how she did it. She'd never tried to describe it to anyone. Maybe it was a bit like how it felt when a baby pulled at your breast with its hungry mouth to make the milk come. But she didn't know that sensation. To her, it was like letting go finally when you'd long been wanting to piss, and feeling the hot wetness splash out of you and keep coming like it would never stop. It was like that, and yet it was nothing at all like that. Bring us home, she begged, of Uhamiri, of her gift. As she tried to keep her balance, it was all getting confused in her mind. She was a sluice, and power surged through her. She tried to guide it as it flowed. It was like holding back the seas with a winnowing basket, but the dada-hair lady shaped her power as best she might. It was the strongest flow she'd ever felt, frightening in its force. The boss man was yelling orders and the shouting and the screaming and the running about, but few were listening. Then, any of her people still standing fell to the decks. Not her, she remained upright. She nodded and smiled. We are leaving now. She shouted in Igbo for those who could understand. Some of those raised up a cheer which became a high piping. The people were changing. The ocean strength of blood would not be held back. The dada-hair lady accepted it. That is how it would be, then let it be. The people's arms flattened out into flexible flippers. The shackles slipped off their wrists. The two women who had been chained to her flopped away free, but the dada-hair lady remained unchanged and shackled. The little boy in her arms was transforming, though. He lifted one hand and spread his fingers to investigate the webbing that now extended between them. The people's bodies grew thick and fat. Legs melted together. The little boy chuckled, a sound she'd not heard from him before this. The chuckle became a high-pitched call. The people's faces swelled and transformed, round heads with snouts, big, liquid eyes. The soldiers had been dodging them, too terrified to pay attention to what was happening. Many sailors had already leapt over the side. A mast snapped and crashed down, killing sailors and destroying more of the ship. The weight of the mast pulled the ship over even further on its side. The captain rushed to the cracked stump and yelled, likely for an axe to cut the mast free. He was ignored. The ship began to go down. The captain glared at the dada-hair lady as though she were responsible. He braced himself against the stump of the mast, pulled out his pistol, and shot at her. The jerking of the ship threw his shot wide. He started picking off her people, one by one, even as they grew thick, protective coatings of fat and fur sprouted on their bodies. "Over the side," the dada-hair lady yelled at them. "Go, into the water." The sound became a deep, urgent, bubbling noise. The dada-hair lady was changing too. Uhamiri would not abandon her. The gift roared through her. She threw the boy from her into the sea just before her arms became flippers. She swelled, large as an ox. She flopped to the deck, landing heavily beside one of the white sailors. He went even whiter as he saw her alter. He backed away, pulling at his pistol as he tried to get it free of his belt. The dada-hair lady started working her body clumsily to the ship's railing. Others of the people were already there, levering themselves up and over into the sea. The splashing, the shouting, the strange animal calls, all was confusion, and the gift was burning through her so hard she could barely see. She lumped her heavy body against the ship's side. She reared up against the railing, which creaked with her weight. The changed people who had made it into the water were swimming clumsily away from the ship, learning the use of their new limbs as they worked them. A shot winged by her ear. The dada-hair lady looked back. A few of the people lay broken on the deck, shot midway through the change. The dada lady's heart broke to see that her friend Belite was one of the dead, but she had no time to stop. The captain was taking aim again. She tumbled herself over the side. As she fell towards the welcoming sea, a bright pain exploded in her foot. With a belching roar, she splashed into the water and down. She looked. A thread of blood followed her down, trailing from her flipper. The captain had shot a hole clean through it. The frightening wound and the salty sting of the sea searing it made the dada-hair lady gasp. She took in water, coughed it out again, flailed with her new limbs. Blood. She had to be giving blood to the earth in order to find a thing lost, but now she gave her blood to the sea. Where was her boy? There. He must be that one, that little one who swam so vigorously towards her, pushing his way through the other sleek, fat bodies. He came. She nuzzled him, urged him with her flipper to swim on ahead of her. Driven by the sound of the ship cracking apart and the danger of falling debris, she followed, learning her limbs as she went. The sea was blue and held them on its breast. They were no longer lost. Thank you.
Is it on? Yes. Thank you. Fabulous.
Thank you.
The New Moon's Arms, one of my favorites. I think they're all my favorites, though. Nalo, what are you holding? What is that?
So, I know how to sew. My mom taught me many years ago when I got to the age where I wanted many, many clothes and exceeded my parents' budget, so she taught me how to make them myself. And she also taught me how to cook, and I have this love for the domestic arts. So a while ago, I started making, this is a technique where you take fabric, sew it into these shapes, stuff it, and then paint it with acrylic paint and sand and paint and sand and paint, till you have something that is, feels a little bit like very thin leather.
Yeah.
So I like the fact that it's using, stuff you can find around the house or in the fabric store or in the craft store. And so sometimes I make these.
And the hair?
The hair
Raffia.
is a combination of straw and I wanted something that looked kind of dada hairish. So I found this yarn that was just beautiful.
Gorgeous, yeah. Wool rovings.
Yeah, bits of old lace I had hanging around.
Your toenails.
Yes, I wanted her toes to be a little bit scary.
Meow.
Yeah, mermaids are not always sweet.
They're not so sweet, really. They got issues.
Yes, and I
And
didn't
long
want her
memories,
to.
right?
Yes, and I didn't want her to be young. I wanted her to have some wisdom of age to her. So
Yes, thank you, thank you. I'm wondering, we were talking earlier about, I have to look things up because, COVID brain and all that stuff. But we were talking about Dr. Jalandra A. Davis at UC Riverside, who is a academic mermairist, merwomanist, and talks and does research about mermaids of the Middle Passage. And I think Seth has a small tidbit we can share with everybody. Jalandra has a website. You can find Jalandra A. Davis online. And she's got this great little bit from many of her things about something somebody posted on Twitter about
she
mermaids.
posted it.
She posted it.
yeah,
And Twitter took it down because it was offensive. Was it really, though? Was it?
yeah, it was her. Yeah,
Yeah, it wasn't offensive, though.
no.
Mermaids is my life's work. One of the things I'm really zeroing in on is this idea of the Middle Passage as the birth of mermaid species, and I call this idea the crossing merfolk. So there's a kind of fun connection of this to the Little Mermaid. This woman on Twitter said, all the Africans y'all threw in the sea, and now y'all surprised a mermaid is black. Not only did this tweet get viral, Twitter took it down because they said it was offensive. Right? And it's like, why is it offensive to state a fact? I loved Disney growing up. I loved fairy tales. That was kind of all you had in terms of female-centered, woman-centered stories. And even though there's more options now, I still think that it's important that all girls get to see someone who looks like them. The fact that these little girls are seeing it at this age, how would that expand their capacity for what is possible for them? There's a long way to go. Representation does matter because it helps to determine the limits of your possibilities.
Truth talk. And is it surprising with all those bodies in there that mermaids be black? I don't think so. I was surprised to see white ones in movies. I was like, what happened to them? So mermaids really, in a way, encapsulate a lot of feminist energy. Want to talk about that a little bit?
Well, the deities, the West African deities that are mermaids, Oshun and Yemaya and Ezili, are often characterized as femme. Very much concerned with beauty and the things of luxury, but also do not mess. Like, don't,
Yes.
because they will take you out. So,
As necessary.
Yes.
Consequences.
yes, so in many ways, when I'm thinking of feminism and a black feminism, that's only one aspect, right? Because you've got, you don't only have femme energy, but these particular deities to which I'm drawn are very much femme. And so they help that stay top of mind for me, that fact that you can look fierce and be fierce at the same time.
Yes, and Mami Wata has that same connection for me, that the goddess of the ocean has this power, this beauty, but serious danger.
Yes, yes. So it's just a reminder that we have this power, or that we can have this power. We are sometimes prevented from it.
That's for me a really big reminder that even if you think someone's taken away your power, it still rests within you. You can tap into it. It's still there.
You can. The ways the world has of taking away our power are extreme and brutal. So I don't want to downplay that. But know that if you're in spaces where you can access it, it's there. And I don't just mean female energy or feminine energy or all of the energies. We have it.
Yeah, the cosmos, we're part of that. So we have to keep remembering it so we can tap into that. I think we should talk a little bit about Afrofuturism, which, since we both get pegged with the Afrofuturist tendencies. I didn't know Afrofuturist was a thing until I met Yatasha Womack. And she wrote the book, Afrofuturism. And then she asked me about Afrofuturism.
I literally just quoted Natasha at a meeting about a week and a half ago. I was in Daytona Beach, Florida, for a meeting of the Florida Library Association. So you can imagine it was an embattled space, and they knew they were embattled. And literally, as I was writing down Natasha's quote, the indictment of critical race theory was coming down from the Florida government. And I'm like, Jesus, am I going to go there and get arrested because of what Natasha said? And I was speaking to the outgoing president of the association the night before, and he said, no, please don't hold anything back. We know what you're here about, and we need to hear this stuff. Yeah, Natasha is fierce. And,
What was the quote?
It was long. But she talked, I did a quote and a clip, and she talked about being in Chicago, speaking to a group of black children in, I think, early high school, to talk about Afrofuturism, which she does. And she asked them what their dreams for the future were. And one after another, they said they wanted less violence. So that kind of knocked her back for a bit. And then she said, well, that's what you don't want. What do you want? And it took the whole class of sort of pulling from her, trying to pull this, to set their imaginations free. And as they were getting ready to leave, one of the children, a young girl, said, so you mean to tell us, no, this art that we're making, it was an art class, these poems, this whatever it is, that we can use those to tell stories about what we want. And it had taken the whole class to get these children to the point where they dared to open up in front of each other and her about what they wanted of the future.
And dream of the future.
Yeah.
Instead of just fear it. Ugh.
Yeah.
That's what Afrofuturism is here for. It's amazing to go to places. I've done this on my own and with Yatasha, and talking to people that people don't even believe they exist in the future. And Alyssa Wormsley did a big project that was exactly that, just posters all over. Yes, black people live in the future.
I actually have one of her shoulder bags that I'm taking apart to make a dress out of it.
I remember when I saw that, I was like, this is the deepest, most obvious, how come I haven't seen this thing? Can I have 5 of those posters?
I mean, you may have heard the actress Nichelle Nichols, who played the original Lieutenant Uhura on Star Trek. Her role in the beginning was supposed to be much more meaty, and it got reduced and reduced and reduced against her and the writer and producer's wishes, till basically all she was doing was sitting there in a miniskirt saying, hailing frequencies open, Captain. This is a woman who was a trained actor, she was a dancer, she was just amazing. So she got bored, and she was thinking of quitting. She was in her dressing room one day, and someone asked if he could enter, and it was Martin Luther King. And he said, you know, I hope that you don't leave. I understand if you do, but you are at this moment the only vision Black people have of us being in the future. So she stayed.
Word.
Yep.
I went to engineering because of her. And I left because of all the other guys that had never really seen her. Better things ahead, for sure. Yeah, it's this idea of how do we create dreams and fantasies for ourselves and for parts of us, for everybody in the future, where we do have a world without violence, where people aren't hungry, and everybody's fully realized in what they want to give to the world, not what they're fighting the world to not take from them. Mm-hmm. It's a shift. It's called abundance. You got to believe in abundance theory.
And for me, there's something really integral in looking back to the past and looking to our mythologies and looking to our older fantasies. There is a story amongst the Taino people, the indigenous people of the Caribbean, that says that they used to live on the moon. And they were aware that the moon was a spherical object shining in the sky, and that all the little dots they could see around them, they were aware were also spherical objects, including the Earth. But where the others were shiny and the one they were on was shiny, the Earth was dingy. And they felt embarrassed because it was in their neighborhood and they weren't looking after it. Mm-hmm. So there's that sense of stewardship, right? Mm-hmm. Of you're responsible for your surroundings. So they came down to Earth in cloud boats and set about cleaning up the water and the air, but they'd forgotten to tie the boats. And being clouds, the boats floated back up. So that's their story of how people ended up on the Earth. Mm-hmm. And I love this story so much because these are people who've been there for millennia and who, through the power of observation, intuited that the objects they were seeing in space were spherical and that they were on one of them. I mean, how many centuries later did Galileo Galilei get excommunicated from daring to suggest?
Just imagining that,
yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And that sense of stewardship and that sense of we need to take care of what's around us.
Yes, as we enjoy it, there's stewardship. That's a key part of living in the earth, not just on it, but being a part of it. As you take, you have to replace. You can't just take from the well. That's what we would say in Jamaica, bring to the well. Mm-hmm. Don't just take. Otherwise, there's no water tomorrow.
Yeah, so for me, that idea of past, future, present is fluid. And I really look to a lot of the older tales for inspiration, for basically showing me how to shape a narrative, that tried and true fairy tale or folk tale shape that you see that's like a three-hander almost. It's, things are bad, person tries to fix them, things got worse. Then you have the final sort of try. So that power of three is, when I was starting to write, is one of the ways I would shape my stories, because I can't plot for shit.
Just freeform those 3 steps.
Yep.
And then connect the dots. Yeah.
I'm looking at your lovely work.
Thank you. For people who don't know for sure what this is my work that was in the Vancouver Art Gallery for Vancouver Special in 2021, 2022. It's 3 stories of hand-dyed, hand-shaped, resist, organic indigo. There's no environmentally negative consequences from this indigo process that I do. It's very slow fermentation dyeing. And these went from the top of the 3rd floor all the way down to the 1st floor in the art gallery.
I can almost smell the indigo.
You can smell it, right?
Yeah.
Indigo definitely has a particular smell, especially organic indigo. It smells like the earth, like a farm. Inky, juicy. Yeah. That's usually how I would find my indigo teachers when I first started studying. They'd say, just walk up the hill and you'll smell me. I used indigo in this work mainly because of the inspiration of the curator Faneuil Antwi, who you probably know from UBC, also in English writing. Indigo is the original slavery crop. A lot of people think it's cotton. It's not. It was indigo. And indigo was actually part of a targeted theft of technology-rich people in Africa. We knew how to do this. They didn't. So they targeted us and took us, along with the plants, to grow indigo in the Caribbean and in the south of the United States. And they just made a couple of mistakes taking us, right? It's hard to do indigo. You can mess it up by doing it and not tell people what you're doing right. Plus, indigo griots know how to read the stars. They know how to travel in the wild, and they know a fair bit of medical technology. So it was pretty, not easy, but designed that when we got there, we were going to figure out how to escape and get away. And that's what happened to most of the indigo plantations. The people all just disappeared. Where'd they go? And so then they switched to cotton, where you could be more brutal and deprive people of more physical initiative and take a different population with you. So you had less of the literate technologists there to help people get away. So that was all part of the process. And sometimes we had to just reach out to Mami Wata to come, as in Women's Arms, and save us. And an interesting thing about indigo is it's not soluble in water, even though it's a water dye. Oh, I know. There's a lot of connections to the humans who had to get off the ships. And when the ships crashed with indigo, you could actually send people down and find the indigo in bags and cakes. So there's a lot of mysterious connections for me to the water, to escape, Afrofuturist connections of time travel again. Mm-hmm. They're all embedded in that when I make these things and I think about that.
And one of the things that's been wonderful for me to learn is that in parts of North America, in the Americas in general, it was not unheard of for Africans escaping slavery to be taken in by local indigenous communities. Didn't always go that smoothly, but there were places where it did. I got to tell the truth, where people were taken in, made full members of the community, treated like humans. And you can see a reference to that in an African-American folk tale about Uncle Monday. And Uncle Monday was a man who'd been taken in slavery, who escaped, went into the Florida swamps, was taken in by the communities there, and the Seminoles. And this was during the Seminole Wars. And he was a practitioner of crocodile magic, coming from Africa, and they had alligator magic, so they were like, cousin, right?
Come in.
And when the Seminole Wars began to go badly for them, they decided it was time to take a retreat for a bit. So he and they got together and did their rituals and turned each other into alligators and went into the swamp. And the story is that they're waiting until the time is right to come back out. So I just love the way that the story remembers the history. And when I was writing, I did a comic series in Neil Gaiman's Sandman universe for DC a few years ago, and very much wanted to tell the Uncle Monday story. And so you search for ways to make things make sense. And the fact that his name was Monday was easy, because coming from West Africa, he would have his name day. He would have the name of the day he was born. So I looked at what Monday was. But then I wanted to make this crocodile-alligator connection and discovered that there is a community there that says they owe their lives to the crocodiles, that they live near a big lake that dried up, all but dried up in a drought once, and the lake was full of crocodiles, and the crocodiles moved aside to let them take water, and that's how they were able to live. This is a community where people you'll see photographs of them. Their kids are riding on wild crocodiles. They're they're playing cricket with crocodiles just kind of wandering by. They live in community with the crocodiles. So I was able to say, well, let's say he came from there. Mm-hmm. And so bring the story in a way that I could trace, that I could make bits of it that fit together. It's wonderful to look for that stuff and then it's right there.
And then it really is there. And I love that, especially in your writing, where things that people think are myth or people think are maybe a little bit weird, a little kinky, and they're just rendered as normal parts of life. This is just what we do. It's Sunday. One of my favorite stories, Emily Breakfast. It's back there, making love to hominids. I love that so much. It's Sunday, and this is the day we clean our toys. We oil the leather. We clean the paddle room. And we go get some eggs from the dragon chickens, you know?
Yeah, it's a story about two men, husbands to each other, who are living in Toronto, that I changed a little bit. You have to know a little bit about climate and plants to know that I've changed it, that there's been enough global warming that Toronto now grows bougainvillea. Most people don't catch it, but... and they keep chickens, and they have 3 chickens and a cat. And the chickens came from a tale a friend told me, and I altered them a little because I'm writing fantasy. Mm-hmm. And in this world, chickens are descended from dragons. So, which they kind of
are, anyways.
Kind of squid. And Emily, the chickens are named Lunch, Dinner, and Emily Breakfast. And Emily Breakfast has gone missing. But it's Saturday, so these 2 guys, part of their Saturday chores is, like you said, cleaning. They have a dungeon in the basement. They're in a 24/7 relationship. And why not?
Why not? Chores. You gotta get ready for Monday and Tuesday.
Yeah, you gotta keep that stuff clean. And the cat flies.
Of course it does.
So one of the things they teach you when they're teaching you how to write fantasy is that in order for people to recognize the fantastical elements of the world, other people than the protagonist need to be able to witness those events. Mm-hmm. That's how you know that the protagonist is living in consensus reality. And that works when I'm writing a story for a publisher that is used to genre fiction. But I was asked for a story, and that was the one I had, and I sent it to a magazine that does not know genre fiction. So when the copy-edited version came back, the copy editor kept querying the cat. Which, if you have cats, you know is just really not going to work. But she kept saying, you make it sound as though the cat is flying. And I'm like, what part of it cleaning its pinions and leaping into the air after butterflies?
Soaring after dragonflies?
I thought I had made it obvious, but the fact is that reading protocols are strong, and we know what to expect depending on the genre we're reading. And she didn't grasp that she was reading fantasy. She didn't know enough about chickens to know that when they're angry, they don't actually grow. Spurs don't fall from their heels, and they don't breathe fire.
That seemed okay to her.
Those were okay, but the flying cat really got on her wick.
I like that she didn't question the cleaning of the dungeon.
No,
the
that was
normalcy
fine.
of that. That's fine. Just another Saturday.
Yep.
There's so much in this world of Nalo to enjoy. But one thing that really struck me as I'm reading your wonderful stories is how we both let Orisha occupy us and have, having a deity ride us and transmit through time and space. You did that beautifully it's in this book here, in the sci-fi conference where they were having a little problem with race in the future people from outer space. I remember this because that's when I said I'm not going to buy any other sci-fi except Nalo's for 20 years. I was so mad at them.
Yes. And at first I was wondering what you were referring to, because for all of this, not especially religious or a religious practitioner, this just stuff does speak to me very deeply, though. So that was the attitude I took on to speak to these folks. And this was all of active science fiction community. If you look up the phrase Race Fail 09, you will find probably at this stage hundreds of thousands of email posts. If Twitter was a thing then, Twitter posts, just a bunch of things happened to galvanize the community around race. And it's a community that thinks of itself as very progressive. And it's certainly better than it was.
Yeah.
But it was the kind of community where I would go to a convention and be mistaken for Octavia Butler because I was the only black person there.
God, yes.
That doesn't happen anymore, which is good because Octavia's
Because they know
passed now.
she's passed away.
But it's me, Nadine, Nora, and Nisi who get confused for each other. And we're not helping by having two-syllable names that start with N.
Yeah.
But I got invited to speak at this conference, and the topic was race, and I knew I wanted to address this. And I was very, very nervous because I suspected that a couple of the key naysayers, people who thought of themselves as being very much allies, but who were publishers and who were saying really asinine things to people who dared to talk about science fiction not being as welcome to people of color as they wanted. I had a feeling they would be there, and these are powerful people. And I didn't have a speech. I kept trying to write it, and then I would get angry and go walk around the block and and then have to like sit down and watch some bad TV.
Take some boxing.
So up until the day before, speech was not finished until I came upon that idea of the translator from another planet, and decided I would start a very normal sounding speech and then have this translator take hold of me in the way that happens in Yoruba religion, where the deities, you invite them and they ride on your head, in your head, for the period of the service. And you become them. People can do things in the middle of being, having God riding on their head that they cannot do in real life. And it's the opportunity for the deities to speak directly with their believers. So I made this translator be somebody who could do that. So I essentially got the spirit in the middle of the...
In the middle of the talk.
Yeah.
Started shaking, and then the translator from another world started speaking through you.
Yes, and had trenchant questions for the people gathered because they were unable to understand some of the things that we say.
Which we still can't understand some of those things right now.
Yes, yes.
I know that.
And so they were asking the crowd gathered for clarification.
Yeah.
And it was stuff like, that's universal. Like, jazz music isn't black, it's universal. My writing isn't universal, it's black. And the translator said very reasonably, where we come, universal means everybody.
Everybody.
So why are you using this word in contradictory ways we don't understand?
Right, implying that you own it because it's universal, but is it yours, really?
Yeah. It went across quite well, in fact. I was shaking all the way through it. And then there was a beat after I stopped. Probably didn't help I was wearing a T-shirt that said "Speaker to White People."
Yeah, Nalo had an outfit on and then took off the outer shirt, and the shirt said "Speaker to White People" on it.
And
This is kind of the sci-fi conference crowd. Yeah.
So some of you may know of the horror writer Peter Straub, lovely man who passed recently. Very tall, imposing, but also the sweetest guy I have ever met. Lots of horror writers are actually genuinely sweet people because they're not suppressing all of that stuff. And he was right in front, and when I got done, all 6 foot how much of him was the first to his feet, which meant I could breathe. And I will be eternally grateful to that dear, dear man.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. I often in my art practice have had people from another time, from this planet, but in the future, descend on me and sit on my head and talk to people when we're engaging in questions about, you say you care about the environment, but what is up with the oceans? Why are there toothbrushes in tortoises' noses? The same kind of disconnect happening, right?
And what's that like? What kind of response do you get? And what's it like being physically in that space?
It is that thing where you feel you have another power and you can do other things. And when I did this performance at the Surrey Art Gallery, that's when Chief Marilyn Gabriel was there. And she went wild. People thought I had paid her because she was throwing tissues in the air, screaming, "There's people from the future here! What the fuck are you doing to the planet?"
So nobody else understood call and response?
No, not enough, a few. And at the end of that, she welcomed me and said, "You can come and be an indigo griot here and just keep talking to these people and straightening them out." So I've always been very thankful of the creature that descended on me to let that happen at that event. It was fantastic.
Yeah. I don't know that I could have done that speech without it. Yeah.
That power, it comes and it helps you, it shields you, it takes you to a higher place.
Yeah. It was terrifying, but lovely.
Yeah, it always is. I see Seth looking at me. We still have some time, Seth? So we're gonna maybe open the floor up to people if you have questions for Nalo. Because I'm just gonna, be your best friend now, and we're gonna have these conversations all the time. So. We have a couple of mics in the audience, so if you have a question or for either of us or comments, just raise your hand.
And we can't see very well up here. There's lights in our eyes, so be bold.
Yeah, be bold. Let the spirit move you. Go, I want to know.
There's somebody, second row here.
Thank you for sharing your knowledge and experience.
Thank you.
My question is, what inspires people to write science fiction? Because I'm a science major in mathematics, and I read quite a few science fiction. But at the same time, there are a lot of metaphors which people either get it or they don't get it. So, and is there any difference between science fiction written by women compared to men, or is there a diversity of gender diversity in the writers?
Yes, there is. And thank you for that. And I don't think the difference is so much in who's writing it, but in the experiences they've had to have in the world because of who they are. So yeah, we've got writers of all genders, and some people choose to pick those issues up in their writing, some don't. Most of us do. And I know it's really important, was and still is important to me to see science fiction that is in some ways reflective of the real world, because it's not just about escapism. That's what people will tell you when they're trying to shame you out of reading it. But one, who doesn't want to escape this mess that we're in? And two, Walter Mosley, the writer Walter Mosley, who also writes science fiction as well as everything else he writes, has said, particularly black people, but anybody who's marginalized or needs change, we know we need to make change, but you need to be able to imagine what that change is going to be. Can't just sit there in a vacuum and say things need to be different. In some ways, that always, when I say that, for me, it doesn't exactly feel like the truth. It is and it isn't. I think of science fiction as sort of the narratives we tell each other about technological progress and the ownership of it. What that means. We change the world. We literally change the world, and that change changes us. And we go on this merry round of, you know, it can all go to hell or it can go well, or being us, we haven't managed to totally destroy the whole thing yet. And somehow we keep going. So I think it's the story of that very human impulse to change the world for good or for ill. And that's partly what science fiction is doing. So yes, there are a lot of metaphors, except usually in the context of the story, those aren't metaphors, those are real. And if you read science fiction trying to see the metaphor all the time, rather than sinking into the story, you'll make yourself you'll get yourself turned around a little. You'll get confused. So you have to give the story its conceit.
You have to go with the flow.
Yeah.
And for me, as somebody who studied science for a very long time, I think I'm still studying it in some ways. Making these fermented digital objects.
Totally science.
Samuel Delaney, I'm not sure. Delaney, how he says his name, was, to me, when I first read his sci-fi, it's Afrofuturist, but I knew the person talking to me was black. There was no picture on the book. There was no message. I also knew he was queer, and he is.
He so
but
is.
Of his time, they didn't talk about that too much. But when you read his writing, you're gone. It's another world where everything can be whatever you want it to be. And all the rules don't exist anymore. So imagine a space where there are rules outside. There's no rules. You make the rules. That's what I would love about reading that as I was being ground into a finer powder in my engineering classes.
Yeah. I had a slightly different experience with Delaney's work, because I come from the Caribbean, black people in the majority, hella racism, but that sense of being in the minority, not so much. So I didn't pick up the cues when I was reading books like Dahlgren. But I worked for it's now the Toronto Public Library, it was then the North York Public Library, and wanted more of his books. And so persuaded one of the buying librarians to order his most recent novel for me. And for wonder, it came in hardcover, which libraries prefer, but at the time the tendency was to publish science fiction. It came out of the pulp era, was to publish it in softcover. So I'm reading this book, I'm glorying in his words. Chip's writing, Delaney's writing is like granola on steroids. You have a mouthful, you gotta sit down and have some water, and you know what I'm talking about.
A little bit of microdose on top of that, too.
Yeah, think about your life choices. So, because all these ideas are just like exploding, and he's talking about just marginalized people are the ones who the story is about, and in real ways.
In real ways, yeah.
So I'm taking a break, and I'm looking at the book as artifact, and I open the inside back cover, and there's a picture of a black man. And my universe doubled in size.
Yeah.
Because I didn't know anybody else who looked like me, who was except the guy who lent me some of the books way, way early on. Didn't know anybody else who was into science fiction. And then I couldn't figure out why I hadn't picked up the cues. I knew he was gay, sure.
Yeah.
That's in there.
Yeah, there's a lot of that in there.
But the race stuff, even though he's talking quite explicitly about race, I had not picked up until I saw a picture of him. And then I went looking for all the other black science fiction writers. At that time, you could count them on one hand. It's changed a lot.
Thank goodness.
Did somebody over here have a
Question? We have a mic, though, so everybody can hear you.
can hear you.
You can hold it really close.
Thank
Really
you.
close.
Your mask.
I was wondering, while you're art making, while you're writing, doing creative work, what kind of surprises have you experienced come up?
So many. So many. A lot of the work I did for the Vancouver Art Gallery came at a time when I was recovering from really severe COVID long hauler, and I'm still always going to be recovering from that. I got COVID in the very beginning, before there were vaccines or anything. So I decided to use this motivation to get physical again and get back into the studio. And of course, Fanuel is encouraging me 1,000%. Don't hold back, go crazy, go to the floor. And that's 60 feet of fabric, okay?
Yes.
Per piece, 60 feet of hand-woven cotton. It's quite heavy. So the first surprise was when I tried to take it out of the indigo vat and nearly fell over, and then realized, oh, I better call somebody to come help me right now.
Drowned in indigo.
Drowned in indigo, just like, blah, they would have found me. And that, I had never thought that there would be a time when I was physically murdered by my vat. But now I know she could do that to me. So we had to work through things like ropes and pulleys. And I was really lucky that I had gone to a textile natural dye conference in the south of France and met this guy from Norway who works with disabled people who have lived through wars and horrible situations. And he's customized the indigo technology for them to work with indigo again. And so I had to go back and look up that paper, find him online, and figure out how to use pulleys and how to get this 250-pound fabric out of my vat again. So it's always a learning thing, and you never know, I think, what you're going to learn. But if you put yourself out there, challenges happen, and you have to figure out, how's this going to work? It's too heavy. Yeah. So most of it, I had 2 people helping me.
It doesn't seem like enough.
No, it's not.
I'm trying to make a heavy canvas curtain now. It's 1 sheet, just floor to ceiling, and manipulating that thing.
Pulleys. We can come put some pulleys in and see.
It's only like 9 feet. Yeah. One of the things I've learned is how generous people can be. This work involves a lot of research, as you're hearing, and I have discovered just how eager people can be to share their knowledge with you. I was working on the Salt Roads, and one of the characters is the 19th century French poet Charles Baudelaire, and another was his black mistress. And he'd written a poem to her that was, I could tell, extraordinarily snide. Baudelaire's French is deceptively simple until you try to translate it. And I couldn't do it myself. I had enough French to understand what he'd said. And he was trying, near as I can tell, she would dance, and he was trying to describe this motion and had no words for it. So he had this, talked about her head balancing on her neck like that of a baby elephant. And I'm like, okay. But the book I was writing was in English, so I needed a translation, and I couldn't find one. So in desperation, I went and looked up Baudelaire scholars who had translated his work, and got in touch with 2 of them to ask if either of them happened to have, a translation of Le Serpent qui Danse just sort of sitting in there. One of them didn't, neither one of them did, but I told them I was working on a novel. And next thing I knew, I got an email from one of them, and he had translated the poem overnight for me.
Oh.
He got so intrigued by what I was doing. And that kind of thing has happened over and over again. I've been lucky enough to be working at some place like UBC, and before this at the University of California, Riverside, research universities. And like this gentleman has told you, a lot of people in the sciences are also interested in science fiction. And often, if there's something I can't figure out, because I failed science, I got as far as first year in biology, and then I was done. I found that often all I need to do is sort of ask around. And the sheer generosity that people have gifted me with. So it's one of the things I tell the students, because they often look at me dubiously when I say you have to do some research. I'm like, it's all right, we're in a big university. There's tons of people who are just dying. To have somebody ask them about their specialty. Yeah, so that's one of the things I've discovered. There's a hand way at the back.
Way back there. Be generous, be stewards. Things will happen, yeah.
Thank you so much for this abundant evening. I have a question. Who are your mentors or muses? Can you identify any of those just to give us a little inspiration?
I'm here with one of mine. So happy.
Many of them are scholars. When I discovered literary theory, critical theory, I didn't understand the half of it. I had to read it with a dictionary. But the synthesis of ideas that people were using to analyze my work and the work of others helped me understand what I was doing. So I don't believe a word of it if a scholar working in nonfiction tells me, oh, but I don't do anything creative, you do. It's not true. It's not at all true. Chip, I've talked about Delaney, who sort of changed what I knew science fiction was capable of. And I was fortunate enough when I went to Clarion, which is a 6-week science fiction writing workshop. Every week there's a different writer in residence, and the year I went, he was one of them.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah, so I got to meet him. A lot of the feminist writers in this genre, a lot of people working in other forms. I see what you're doing, and it moves. Like, it has sound, it has tactile quality, it has water just embedded into it.
Yes.
Choreographers. I can't nail it down to any one set of influences. I love crump, for instance, a form of dance that came out of LA, and what it performs about how we see black male bodies. There aren't only male dancers, but the people who created it originally were male. Tells story in most astonishing ways. So many. So I would just encourage people to read widely in the genre, or look for anything that says it has a hint of magic or the future in it, and you can start to suss out the things that you're looking for, because blurbs and reviews don't always tell you. They'll say something is magical. What they mean is it's full of dragons. But, they think that it's a bad thing to say that.
They don't want to let you know. Yeah, dance has been a big influence for me. It's a lot of why I look for that movement, the change of sound, the murmuring. Senga Ngudi, nobody knows who she is, but she has a retrospective at DIA Beacon. In the 60s, Senga Ngudi was an African-American woman from the States who met someone from Africa and finally found a place of liberation, changed her work, and really worked on an immersive, abstract, large-scale way that kind of was an inspiration for me, that you can go big. You don't have to go home. Go big.
You are home.
Yeah, you are home. You are home.
Yeah.
Yeah. Question here?
If you were to go back in time and talk to your younger self, what would you say?
Keep doing yoga, you fool. Don't stop just because it's easy now.
I actually had to answer that question today. A writer from the Toronto Star is doing a piece on, she's asking queer writers from Toronto a bunch of questions, and that's one of them, and I bagged on that one, because I don't know what I would say to my poor, confused younger self. I mean, I knew I wasn't crazy. I knew the world was.
Ditto.
Maybe you're going to make it, because I wasn't sure I would. And in the vein of keep doing yoga, somebody once asked poet and activist Leah Lakshmi Piepshna Samarasina the same question, what advice she would give to younger artists, and she said, floss.
Floss.
And
That too. That
having
too.
been homeless for a couple of years and lost a bunch of teeth,
Yeah.
I'm here to tell you, floss.
Floss
Yeah.
twice at least, really.
Yeah.
It's real. And if you don't believe it, there's actually a connection between Alzheimer's and not flossing that's just been published. So get that floss out there.
I think just knowing I would get to a place where I could find my voice would have been very, very valuable. I was afraid to speak.
Other questions? There's one inside here. Oh, somebody got the mic there. Go ahead.
Gerlekas dachla nukro amixem gilagrame gayuklanla muskamat zawadeno. Thank you, Nalo and Valerie, for your evening of conversation tonight. My question is around, so a lot of the work I do is on the ocean with Muskamat Zawadeno youth, and storytelling of the lands and waters of my traditional territory is a big part of that work on the ocean. And these are traditional stories that are passed down through our nation for generations, and kind of thinking of the past and thinking of the future, and this work that we're doing on the lands and waters, like how do we, like what is your process for connecting those traditional stories and bringing them into the world of science fiction and bringing them into that kind of future, those future worlds?
Thank you. That's a good question. I search out the stories a lot because Caribbean tales and African tales, I have to search to find them. And then I have to take the courage to change them because I'm writing fiction in a different mode. I need to be able to have the stories be malleable. So I'm always navigating that territory between what an artist does in a contemporary mode, because not all artists do this, and respect for the stories and the culture that they came from. And I couldn't tell you how I do that, but it's very important to me. And speaking about the water in particular, I mean, Barbadian writer Karen Lord said to me recently, because we'd both come out with stories that were about ocean level rise, she said, Nalo, I'm a Caribbean writer, of course I'm thinking about what's happening to the oceans. So that's part of what I do, is that I'm always keeping those stories in mind and learning more of them. And I've been fortunate, my mother was a library technician, so I had access to the library early on. My dad was a poet and a playwright and an actor, so I had access to stories. So I feel like I'm always learning. And then something will happen, like two things collide in your mind and you think, oh, this could work with this. Yeah, that help.
Yeah. Mishwek, thank you. I think too, I keep learning. I keep trying to find new ways. When I started doing indigo dyeing 30 years ago, everybody was convinced you had to do this in a real dangerous, environmentally toxic way. And I just didn't believe that. As a scientist, as somebody who'd studied environmental science, I didn't want to do that. And I found people who knew other ways of doing it, that they'd been doing for hundreds of years, and they drank water out of the river where they worked with their indigo vats. So you already look for people who know this is all part of my microcosm. And those are the people you seek out to learn from. You figure out what gifts you have to give them to have them let you in, and realize they know better than you. You know, just because you have a degree from some university doesn't really mean everything anymore, or ever.
Yeah.
Other comment? Yes, right there.
Hello. Hi.
You can bring it really close, really close.
Okay, here we go. I teach writing workshops in the downtown east side, and I was just wondering if you had any kind of writing advice for trying to get people inspired that might not necessarily feel like they're have something to share or something worth sharing. Like, what kind of advice do you give when you're trying to inspire students and people just learning?
I try everything I can. I mean, I'm lucky that if I'm teaching in a university setting, which means people have the choice to be in the class. So there's got to be some urge in there somewhere. I remind them about the way they talk when they're talking to their friends. We all have this natural storytelling mode, so I try to get them to access that. I have an exercise that works where I try to make, they come thinking fantasy and science fiction are so mysterious, and they kind of are, but fantasy is also the oldest mode of storytelling in the world. So I have them imagine that they're asleep wherever they are, and they see a blue light coming under the door, or they hear a sound, depending on what mode of perception they use. And they open the door, and there's a portal. And then I say, what next? And that will get people imagining all kinds of things I never could have. Somebody threw his cat through the portal. Waited to see what would come back. So I have a bunch of little sort of tricks like that. Everybody's got it in them, and one of the things I do is say, I don't want to see you demonstrating mastery, otherwise you wouldn't be here. You are experimenting, and I want to see those raw things you think are too crazy, stuff you couldn't finish because you didn't know what to do next. We are experimenting here. Sometimes I'll do the assignment I've given them along with them. That one I don't do as much. It's hard. Writing is hard.
It is. It's very hard.
Yeah, but I try to get them out of this mode of expecting that they're supposed to show me perfection. I don't even know what that would be in terms of art, you know?
Mimicry in some ways, perhaps.
Yeah, I guess, but then would it... Yeah, long conversation.
Yeah, it's deep. Yeah, I guess the thing I do whenever teaching my students something new that they're afraid or they don't know if they're going to do this is just you have permission to fail. Yeah. You don't have to make a perfect story. You can make a really bad story. There's discoveries in that loss and then finding, and then you lose something else and you find something else. And you lose your barriers to say, I can't do this. And you find out you can. That's the key part of that journey.
Yeah, and a professor at, what university am I at now? At UBC. I mix them up, they all start with U. John Vigna in my department taught me a technique that has been working really well, and that's to, I get the students' permission first, but every week I'll take maybe a sentence or a paragraph of someone's writing and share it with the class. And because they've done something that is worthy of note, and I reassure them I'm never going to pick something that I think didn't work, because they're always sure that you're going to make fun of them. But I'm going to pick something that does work, and I'll talk about why for me it works, and then I'd like to hear from you, what was going on there. And I tried to spread it out amongst the whole class, where you'll have people with varying levels of practice and technique, but everybody at some point is going to write something, even if it's a sentence that just sings. And attendance went up, because you never knew if you were going to be called on, but you knew it was going to be good. And people who'd never had their writing praised, I just watched their shoulders sort of and their backs straighten and begin to speak about their own process. And that has been very powerful for me. John
Sounds wonderful. Yeah, I'd love to do that. Time for one more, maybe? I see a hand back
And
there.
that went up and then back down again very quickly.
Go Go for it. Wave it. Wave it out there.
Speaking of process, I am curious about your process as a writer and I guess as an artist as well, because I'm sure it's probably changed over the years. And I have a friend who talks about how he has a different process for each book, or do you even have a process at all and it just happens? I don't know.
I would say, like, when I first started working with art, one of the most frustrating things people would say to me is, trust the process. Trust it.
Process, what is that?
What is a process? What is it? I would say back at them. And now I'm a process-based artist, so yeah, I'm trusting up.
I think you have to find how your brain works. I have adult ADHD, nonverbal learning disorder, fibromyalgia. I'm getting old and things hurt. I'd really much rather be watching another episode of The Witcher and making fun of it, but still watching it. So one of the things I had to learn is this idea that you sit down and you get into the work and you do it every day and that's how a real artist works. Doesn't work for me unless I'm on deadline. Because I just get overwhelmed at the idea of having to concentrate for that long. Sometimes I have 30 seconds in me. So I had to do the opposite. I had to say, if I have written a sentence, I can call that a successful writing day, and I can walk the fuck away from the computer. Mm-hmm. That doesn't work for everybody. Some people need to have that. I like to just get started and see what happens. Some people, that would just stop them because there are just so many possibilities. So I think everybody's process is going to be different. And you're right, it's going to change. Mm-hmm. I had to learn when writing for comics, particularly when you're writing for the big two, so I was writing for DC, they want to know months ahead of time what's going to be in your story. I don't know. But they have to sell that thing to booksellers, and they have to get the artists that will suit the work. So they kept pestering me and trying to find different ways to trick me into telling them what was going to happen in the story when I had no clue. Eventually, they paired me up with a co-writer, Dan Watchers, who did Lucifer, the comic, the new comic, and he's used to it. So we would sit down and brainstorm. I'm a little better at it, not a whole lot, but that has helped me get unstuck, because I would get stuck. So I think you just keep trying new things. And if you found that process that's going to work for you every time, I cannot imagine what kind of brain that is. But if it's working for you, I don't need to understand why it works. Mm-hmm. My students come to me with a lot of shoulds. Do you find that? They're like, but I should be doing this.
I should be doing it like this way, right?
And I should be, by the time I'm age 45, I should be whatever. Mm-hmm. And so I think part of the process is undoing the shoulds. And giving yourself room to play or experiment, or whichever metaphor works for you, whichever metaphor says, now is not for perfection, now is for finding stuff out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And now is not the way it's always going to be. That's something you have to give yourself space to deal with and absorb. Like we say, we have neurodiversity. We're getting a little bit older, and I'm dealing with COVID long hauler stuff. So that's just the process of realizing writing is hard, and now it's a lot harder for me. What do I do if I want to put words down? Mm-hmm. Sometimes I just go to my studio and make more art. And I turn on my phone, which is not ringing, good.
Someone else's.
And I just talk about my ideas, and that's something new for me. I used to have to do word boards and mind maps and stuff, and I can't do that anymore. But now I can just talk, and then I just have my phone send me a transcript of that, and I just highlight the parts I like, and then deal with it again and again. It's a bigger process for sure.
I do body doubling too, so one of a former postdoc of mine started a small group of women writers and scholars, and that Zoom is always open from 8 to noon Pacific time, and anybody can go, and we chat a bit, but you also work on whatever needs working on, and just having those eyes, like they're never seeing what I write, but just having company for this type of brain makes it way more possible that I'll stick to it for a few more minutes.
Right. Make your support team and keep them close.
Yeah. Yeah. Those people are gold.
We are golden. One last one, if anybody's got a question. Otherwise, yes, right here. Slide the mic around you.
It's coming behind you. It's behind you.
Mine isn't a question. Mine is just, this has been transforming. And I want to say that the arts, to me, I've discovered through this past year, and I'm 79, that it is life-changing. And when we look at changing ourselves, I look at it as unpacking my old things that no longer fit, no longer are part of me, and being open to something new. And honestly, I'm humbled by the two of you, and I'm very grateful that I had the courage to come.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's
We
one
are
of the
very
best
glad
things.
you're here.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Courage. It's a good place to end on, I think.
Yes. Ask us after.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What can we? Get one more?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I want to ask, how do you reward yourself for a job well done?
By seeing all your smiling faces.
Yeah.
Works for me.
It's a problem with ADHD because you do the reward before. So I'm like, all right, I ate all the chocolate. What, you mean I got it right now?
Yeah.
Whatever works in the moment. You can't see it.
Mm-hmm.
There. That was one of my rewards for a novel, for the Salt Roads.
Nice.
Chocolate, happy dance.
Go crazy and get a new vibrator on Amazon. Whatever works.
I wouldn't go to Amazon for that.
Well, you know, I just, I don't, Art of Loving on Broadway is my fave go-to, but, women's wear, everybody knows women's wear, though. That's
I couldn't
everywhere.
remember the name. Thank you.
Art of Loving, go there. Yeah.
And
Make your own. We do workshops at Queer Arts. Right, Mark? We're going to do another one, Hamra?
so whatever is rewarding to you, because at that point, nobody can tell you shit because you made a thing.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. Send yourself flowers.
Yep.
Do that.
Yep, my friend Emily and I we're going to go out for oysters very soon because we got through the school year and she's got a new book coming out. So,
Ooh.
Yep.
You choose.
Yeah.
Thank you, Nalo, so much.
Thank you, Valerie.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Patricia, Massy Books, Massy Arts Society, and SFU for hosting this great event. And I think maybe, Brendan, do you have some more thanks, or are we just going to go for it? Go buy some books, folks. Woo-hoo!